Thank goodness that works. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this weekend's open day. My name is Will. I was the head of our consulting team at UniAdmissions. I'm currently taking a year out to do a master's in neuroscience. I'm joined by Simone. Simone, could you introduce yourself, please?
Hi there. So my name is Simone and I am now a lead consultant with UniAdmissions, and I'm really delighted to be here with you today.
Yeah, and what we are talking about, which I imagine is on most of your minds at the moment, is we're going to be talking about the medical interviews this week. I anticipate most people here are sort of applying this year. So you're in year 13, hoping to get some invitations for interviews if you haven't got a couple already. But for those of you who might be here who are actually applying next year, or for those of you who do apply this year, but things have to, you have to potentially change plans, we will be talking about sort of taking a year out between school and university next week, what sort of you should be doing with that, whether or not that's a good option for you, and the kind of things you could be getting up to. So that won't be relevant for everyone, but for those of you who will be relevant for, please do come along. But yeah, this week we'll be talking about medical interviews. Before I kick things off, there's just one thing I did want to say. We will be taking questions. There is a Q&A function, but what we normally do is come to the questions at the end. So if you do put in a question, don't feel like we're ignoring you. I mean, we are, but we will come back to it later. But please do put those questions in, because it's highly unlikely that you will remember everything. And of course, if you ask a question which gets an answer that is helpful, then that's going to help you with your application. And it might be that there's someone else watching who benefits from that answer as well. So please do ask away. The Q&A is usually my favorite part of this anyway, because it's sort of a bit more sort of unique each week. So yeah, please do send those questions in. But yeah, let's talk about medical interviews. And what the way I want to do it this week is sort of break it down into three main parts. So a bit of I guess, a legacy discussion about the BMAT, because that may or may not have an implication into whether or not you do get an interview. And then moving into, what to expect, the kind of questions that you might get asked, and, how they're wanting you to approach this. Okay. We will, so some of you will have sort of panel-based interviews. We'll focus on quite a lot is the MMIs, because that is the most commonly used kind of interview. But of course, there are principles that span different kinds of interviews, right? There are key things that they're going to be looking at, regardless of how they're actually assessing you, regardless of the specific way they do it. But yeah, first off, starting with the BMAT. For those of you who sat it, I'm sure it was potentially quite a stressful day, or a few different stressful days if you had to resit it. And what we've been spending a bit of time looking at is the results, basically, and the kind of scores that people have been getting this year in comparison to previous years. So if you look at this, this is the score distribution of section 1 in 2019. The reason sort of 2019 is picked is because, of course, last year the BMAT had problems as well. It didn't run very smoothly, and they weren't able to fix that in time for this year, sadly. But 2019 is back when BMAT was sort of running as normal, and so it's the best representation of a typical year that we have, and the most current one that we have. And this shouldn't really seem too surprising. It's a very, well, generally a pretty typical normal distribution, lots of people in sort of the middle range, and then people sort of thinning down near the extremes. One thing, of course, to bear in mind when you're thinking about your BMAT result is where along this distribution you lie. And of course, doing that, I was talking about this a couple of weeks ago, actually, thinking about that in the context of how many people at the medical schools you've applied to are asked for interview. If you're around the 5 mark, you might be thinking, well, that's sort of quite in the middle. But actually, if your medical school interviews the top 40% of candidates and your grades are fine, then actually you're looking like you'd probably be asked to interview, which is a pretty nice thing to be able to be able to say. Let's have a look at this year's. It's not quite as nice looking. It's sort of a little bit, the word that Matt used, Matt's our head of research, the word that he used was lumpy. But so as you can see, it's not got that nice sort of bell curve that you mostly see here in the 2019 data. It does jump up and down a bit. But what does that mean for you as an individual? You know, what difference does it make how the distribution is? Well, the first thing to say is, as you can see, and actually we do have a slide where these two graphs are transposed. As you can see, sort of at the top end, things are relatively similar between the years. So that's kind of suggests that it hasn't become harder necessarily. You know, you're still getting that tapering off of people being able to get, you know, pretty flawless marks in that section 1. Whereas in the middle where it is lumpy, you can sort of, what it means is if you're, you know, in one of these sort of taller bars nearer to the higher end, it's not quite as, it doesn't fall off like it normally would. So you're not quite as confident with what you've got. There are more people in that sort of top of higher bracket than there are in previous years. What it means, well, so ultimately it's difficult to make overly strong conclusions on things like this. Obviously you need to think about your overall application. What it means is you kind of, more than ever, you kind of do want to be on the top end of this to be more confident about your chances of getting in. And again, you really need to be aware of the universities you've applied to, who's going to be interviewed. You know, is it the top 20%? Is it the top 30%? Is it more? And then, of course, you can fit that into where you are on this table and have a good idea. Of course, other universities, you know, hopefully all of you have made applications to UCAT and BMAT universities. And those UCAT universities won't be looking at this at all. They'll, of course, be looking at your UCAT grade. So you should be able to have a bit of a sense. And actually, I do talk about this a bit more in one of the open days we did a few weeks ago. You should be able to calculate within certain sort of confidence intervals how many interviews you might be invited to this year. And then, of course, you can worry about preparing. So hopefully the BMAT went well. And hopefully things have been lining up quite nicely. And hopefully you all have a bit of an idea of what the interview is going to be like. You know, hopefully not too much of this is brand new to you. If it is, then, you know, good. You'll learn a lot today. But you might want to start thinking about this a bit more, and particularly using the Christmas holidays to practice and learn more about what to expect. But what is it, you know, what is it going to be like? What are they going to ask you? All these things I will go through. One thing to say, and this is across sort of those panel interviews and the MMI interviews, is that it is all very structured, okay? I think that there's a lot of people, particularly when you talk about Oxbridge medical interviews, there is a bit of a sort of, a bit of a relic of, you know, how they ran things maybe 50 to 100 years ago, of this idea that it's going to be this very strange, very sort of arcane experience, and you're going to be asked very peculiar questions. You will be asked hard questions, but it is all going to be very standardized across, you know, all the people who they interview. And so actually, you know, it is going to be as fair as possible in terms of the way that they are assessing you. A lot of people worry that it's sort of, you know, just down to the person that's interviewing you. It's kind of not a very accurate measure of people, but they do everything they can to standardize it. You know, you're typically interviewed by multiple people, so you can have that sort of cross sort of verification of if they both think you were good, then that's good. If one thinks you were good and one thinks you were bad, then, you know, that they might need to investigate that a bit more. And of course, they are evaluating you right away. So some students can get a little bit worried when I say that, you know, having that sense that as soon as you're sort of done with your interviews, they're going to be talking about you right away. But that is the best way to make sure that, again, you are being assessed in as proper a way as possible. What you've got to remember is these medical schools want to take on the best students, right? They want to take on the kind of students that they know are going to be fantastic medical students, but also good doctors in the end. So they are going to make sure that if you are the right candidate, they take you on. That is ultimately the whole point. And one thing that the interview is very important for is, of course, this very nebulous term, soft skills. Obviously, you've demonstrated in your exam scores, in your test scores, that you're academic, right? You've shown that to them. They know that you're good at exams, you're good at taking on information, learning things and applying them. Particularly in the MMIs, they want to have a better sense of, well, what is this person like? Are they, going to be good doctors? At the end of the day, this is what you're here for. That's what they're here for. Yes, this person can learn a lot. Yes, they're very academic, but are they actually going to be the kind of person that you want treating you? Are they going to be the kind of person who can sort of care for people? And so very often these MMI stations will involve, role plays to see how you perform and how you behave in those kind of scenarios. So this is something which they haven't actually been able to see from you before. And it's, of course, something that, you won't have done much of before. If they give you a role play in terms of, giving bad news to a family member, that's something that you won't have done before, but it's certainly something that you can practice. And it's certainly something that you can, spend a bit of time thinking about and working on. There's, quite a big difference in terms of, ultimately, one of the best examples here is the knowing versus teaching example, but there's quite a big difference between being able to do everything on paper and being able to do it in person in the way that, ultimately they're looking for. So yeah, you've probably, most of the kind of exams that you have so far are often a bit more sort of academic, a bit more hard skill. They really will be looking for, is that accompanied by an empathetic person behind it? My favorite here is the knowing versus teaching example. Ultimately, it's very easy for people to think they understand something. And when they try and explain it to someone else, suddenly they sort of unravel. The best way to actually reaffirm if you know something is to see if you can get someone else to understand it. And sometimes people say, or students would say, it's actually quite hard preparing for interviews. None of my siblings are sort of interested in sciences or medicine. None of my parents have that kind of background. So I don't have anyone who's able to have these kind of discussions with me. But actually, it can be helpful to have someone who doesn't know about this kind of stuff, because then you've got a blank slate and you can sort of teach them about something. And if at the end of it, they can sort of say it back and understand it, then you're actually doing a really good job. And not only do you understand it very well, but you're able to pass that on to someone else. One of the things that doctors, or is a problem in the NHS at the moment, is doctors being able to help individuals understand important things about their health and well-being. Particularly when you're talking about behavioral approaches, trying to help people stop smoking, trying to help people with sort of weight loss programs. That is all about helping people understand why they need to be doing something and what they need to be doing. So that's actually a really important skill. And that's not something, sometimes people say, well, it's a lot of work to prepare for these interviews and then they're over so quickly. But actually, the kind of skills that you're working on here, those are, particularly if you do end up being a doctor, which hopefully many of you will be, these are the kind of skills which you'll be using for the rest of your life, basically. Definitely professionally, probably personally as well. And this is the interview criteria we've taken from, I can't remember if it's Oxford or Cambridge, but effectively their sort of handbook for, rating students when they interview. These are the kind of things that they're looking for. So they're looking for, you to be interested, this application, the first point. Does this person actually want to be here? Are they interested when I'm speaking with them? Are they responsive? Are they engaged? Because ultimately you're gonna need to be interested in medicine in order to go through those 5 years, because it's a lot of time, it's a lot of work, and if you're not interested, it's going to be a lot harder. They're looking for your ability to work through problems. Again, this is a bit more specific to the panel interviews, but they're looking for your ability to reason, to work through the questions that they give you. And crucially, it's fine to make mistakes in these interviews. It's fine to get something wrong, but that last line, to be able to break free from unproductive thinking, is key. So if you do get something wrong, or you sort of go down an avenue which you sort of realize while you're there, actually, this isn't right, they want to see your ability to notice that, to be able to say, actually, I don't think this is the sort of the correct way to go about it. And potentially, given this information you've told me, this is what I think is a more reasonable conclusion to come to. That is absolutely fine. And they are looking for that. They don't want you to be sort of entrenched and to sort of go down the wrong route and just stick with it because that's what you've said. It's much better to be able to be aware of what you're saying and adjust. And then the communication, this is particularly important in the MMI side of things, and particularly in those role plays. Are you putting across the information that you're trying to put across effectively? Often the more STEM heavy students find this side of things quite tricky. They can solve an equation very easily, very quickly, very routinely, but actually explaining how that works can be a bit harder. And again, if you haven't had much experience of doing something like that, find someone who doesn't know anything about medicine, explain something complicated in medicine to them, and see where you get. If they end up being more confused at the end of it than they started, then a bit of work needs to be done on that side of things. And here we've got some examples from MMIs. I'll go through sort of a couple of them and what they're there for, why they're asking these questions. So how have technological advances changed medical practice? This is really a question to test. Is this student keeping up to date with what's going on in medicine? You've said on your personal statement how fascinated you are by medicine, how much you want to be a doctor, but is that backed up by sort of your behavior? A less good way of asking this question is, are you interested in medicine? Because then you just say yes. But if you are interested in medicine, you should have been sort of keeping up to date with what's going on, and you should actually be able to give a relatively good answer to this. You should be aware of, developments, because medical technology is developing at a hugely rapid pace these days. You should be aware of at least a few examples of that. You might decide to take a very historical approach and sort of go back to the past and talk about sort of quite significant medical changes, the development of vaccination. You could go back very far, the understanding of washing your hands and having sort of effective sort of bacterial sort of clean wards, those kind of things. But you might want to be talking about things that are happening now. Either way, the fact that they can ask you that question and you can respond should reassure them, okay, this kid is actually engaging with this outside of what they have to do at school. The second one, you are a junior doctor on colorectal surgery. Your consultant in charge turns up on Monday morning smelling strongly of alcohol. What do you do? So this is quite remnant of the SJT. Sort of you might be asked to rank how suitable different responses are, say nothing, hand them into the GMC, tell someone about it, those kind of things. Ultimately, it's sort of looking at the way that you would handle these ethical scenarios. Obviously, you can't do nothing, but of course, you need to approach it in a way that's sensitive and effective also. You don't want to sort of log a very meaningless complaint somewhere that never actually gets actioned. Someone needs to talk to this doctor about showing up at hospital drunk. That's not a good thing to be doing. Do doctors hold special positions in society, and do you think nurses are important? These are quite similar questions. Insofar as it's a bit of an assessment of why you want to be a doctor, right? And it's a bit of an assessment of sort of your value hierarchy. In terms of what you don't want to do is say, no, nurses don't matter. It's us doctors that do all the heavy lifting. Because one, that is fundamentally wrong. You will find out very quickly in your degree that nurses are hugely important. But you know what they're looking for in terms of a red flag is someone who has that sort of sense that doctors are these sort of all-powerful beings that, whilst you know obviously doctors are very impressive and they can do a lot, they need to have humility and they need to understand that actually a hospital is run by many people. Doctors are a part of that, but not the only part. And so certainly this is a bit of a way to weed out anyone who potentially wouldn't be suitable in a kind of hospital environment. And then the last question, tell me about a time when you felt sad when doing your charity work. Again, similar to the first one, ultimately this is sort of, you know, has this person actually engaged with the work experience that they're telling us they've done? Have they actually, you know, they said you spent 2 weeks at this hospital. Were you just there because you had to be, or were you there because you genuinely wanted to be and were engaging with it? And ultimately, or you know, or a few weeks working at a homeless shelter, or whatever it is you've put on your personal statement. Broadly speaking, whatever, if you have done charity work or you've had hospital placements, you will probably have seen some upsetting stuff. You know, it's upsetting when you're working at a homeless shelter because there's a lot of people really struggling, and obviously you're there to help make a difference, but it's still difficult to avoid the fact that you need to be there is sad. Similarly, on a ward, you're probably going to see some people in serious pain. You're probably going to see some people given some pretty hard and tough news. And so actually, if you have been present and engaged during your work experience or your charity work, you will probably be able to give an answer to this relatively easily. It should come to you. Whereas if you're kind of just doing it because you're supposed to doing it, this might be harder. So again, it's not really something that you need to prepare for. You know, you don't need to be preparing stock answers for these questions, because actually if you've been engaging with all the stuff you've been doing so far, it should be pretty easy to come up with, well, not come up, it should be pretty easy to respond to the kind of questions that they're asking. So hopefully this gives you a bit of a sense of what to expect. Obviously that you'll be given many more questions than this. And there are ways to, you know, there are sort of books and websites which will go through more example questions. So if you sort of see this and you think, this is all sounding great, I want to have a crack at way more, then there are ways to sort of have a look into that. You know, we talked about the kind of questions that come up. Again, hopefully, if I said, you know, if I asked any of you what is an MMI, you'd be able to give me a pretty good response, and you'd be able to give me a response which looks similar to this. But just in case there's anyone who isn't very familiar with it, ultimately, the way that MMIs work is they split the interview experience down into these different stations. And different universities will do it differently. So you could have 10 stations, you could have 5 stations, you could have 8 stations. But basically, each of these act as independent assessments. So very often these stations don't relate to each other. Sometimes they do, but very often they're sort of independent assessments. So for example, your first one could be a role play. Your second one, they could ask you to sort of calculate someone's BMI. Your third one, they could, you know, have maybe ask you about that drunk doctor on a Monday morning. So you're going through these different stations where they're testing different things. It is often a bit of a challenge to start with, because again, it's not something that you will have really done before. Most of your assessments, you know, if you think about your exams, you're sort of doing the same thing for an hour, 2 hours. Whereas here, some of these stations are as short as 5 minutes, you know, 5 minutes doing one thing, then all of a sudden you're doing something completely different. So again, having a bit of practice of that is going to make it much easier on the day. Otherwise, you might be a little bit startled by how quickly you move through. And again, that's, you know, it's something which you can practice, and I would definitely advocate practicing MMIs as much as you can, really. Of course, you're busy with school, but practicing as MMIs are really, really important. Excuse me. These are a few tips from Matt, our head of research. You know, in terms of just, again, you don't need to be learning loads and loads of stuff, but just a few things to keep in mind. If you said you've done something on your personal statement, make sure you have, because they could ask you about it. It doesn't, you know, you might go through your whole interview experience without being asked a single thing on your personal statement, but it could also come up. So make sure if you've said you've read a book that you've read it. Make sure if you said you've done a work in a charity shop or with, you know, some charitable work, make sure you've done it. And for those of you that haven't looked at your personal statement since you submitted it, it might be worth having a read over it just to make sure that you can remember all the things that you talked about. Make sure that if they give you the opportunity to show off how engaged you have been with something, you make the most of it. You know, you're very much welcome to talk about things that you know about. Don't sort of actively try and steer the conversation away from what they're asking you about. You know, if you're meant to be calculating BMI, don't start talking about how much you know about statins. You know, that can wait. You definitely need to be answering the question, but if something comes up and you know about it, yeah, talk about it. Take your time is pretty generic advice, but it is very important. Very often what I see in students, particularly in their first couple of mock interviews, they rush, right? You're nervous, you've been asked a question, there's a millisecond of silence and already you can feel the awkward tension building and you just want to say something to show that you know what you're talking about. Relax. You don't have to respond immediately. You can take a breath. One of Matt's tips as well is to have you know, when you're doing virtual interviews, have a bottle of water or have a glass of water. That's quite a good way to give yourself a bit of time to break if you're taking a drink. Don't make stuff up. Obviously, Matt says that in fewer words, but you know, they will be able to see through if you're being, well, if you're not being genuine. Just like they will be able to notice when you are being genuine. So be honest with them. And you know, don't make things up. They will know. And of course, if you know, if you're in, I think particularly the Oxbridge interviews, you know, where they are designed to be like a tutorial, you don't have to be a know-it-all. You can ask them about the question that they've asked you. You are ultimately expected to, this is meant to be the start of your learning experience. They're not expecting you to already be a qualified doctor, okay? So you are there to sort of, they're sort of there, well, the whole interviews are there to see what is this student like to teach for the Oxbridge interviews. So be there to learn, enjoy it, try to err away from sort of thinking that you're an expert on everything. I'm sure you probably are an expert on a few things, so it's great to talk about that. But yeah, you are definitely there to be a student, and they want to see how well you can do that. So I've whittled on about interviews definitely for long enough by now. You know, I've alluded to the fact that there are things you can be doing to work on that. And hopefully some of you know a bit about what we do at UniAdmissions, but broadly speaking, we help students with things like this. And so I think Simone is going to sort of talk about what can be done now at this stage to really make a difference for your chances of doing well in these interviews. Simone, take it away.
Thank you so much, Will. So the offerings that we have at this stage would include 3 things. So tutorials, mock interviews, and we also have intensive courses. So we found that this is a really balanced approach. If you've never ever done any interview prep before, it's really valuable to understand what's going to be expected of you, the kind of questions, obviously, that Will has just spoken about, the kind of questions you might be asked, the format, some strategy and some technique. So, you know, at the top end, it's really important to get that balance, to do some learning. And we found that it's a good foundation for your preparations.
Sorry to interrupt, Simone. I'm in charge of the slides, so I'll try and sort of take cues, but do say if you need me to move on.
Okay, perfect. So so that's great. Thank you, Will. Also, the mock interviews then are what would happen next. So with reference to the tutorials, what we would do is we would team you up with somebody who, you know, has studied medicine, who has gone to Oxbridge, who has achieved in the top 10% of their own admissions process, as somebody who is further down the line than you, who understands what it's going to take for you to get your dream offer, essentially. And so you would have your main tutor to do those one-to-one tutorials with you. When we move into the mock interview section, you would get new tutors. It's really important that you are fully cognizant of everything that an interview will entail, including how it's going to make you feel if you walk into a virtual room and you're being questioned by somebody that you've never met before. So it's important to practice that as well. Also to practice the soft skill, it gives you an opportunity to put into practice those things that you've learned from the tutorials. You have to learn in the doing. This is really, really important for this point of the application cycle. So the mock interview is really, really important. And with every new tutor, you would get that bespoke feedback so that you can basically build on what you're learning. Yep. So this is what it looks like. So you'll get your recommendations, you'll get a report, and that will lead you to obviously your own independent study before you go to the next tutorial or to the next mock interview, so that you're getting a sense that actually, you're growing in momentum, you're getting more confident, becoming more articulate and more comfortable at expressing your views and your opinions, which is what they want to see. They want to see somebody who is self-assured, but who is also able to learn and to take on advice. So we're trying to build you up in these skills incrementally, bit by bit. Consistency is key. And then finally, we have the intensive course. So the intensive course usually happens over a couple of days on the weekend, and we've got one this weekend running as well. And it gives you the opportunity to be with other students, which is really important, to do some more mock interviews, but also to witness other students doing mock interviews. So you get a sense of, oh, actually, that's really good, I should be doing that, or that's not so good, and all of the feedback that you're able to glean from the tutors that are conducting those interviews as well. It's intense, but in a fantastic way. And at the end of the intensive course, you should know within yourself that you're absolutely ready, and that given the opportunity to interview, you will shine, you will do your absolute best job and get the outcome that you've always wanted. So, we find it a real pleasure to partner with students who have all of the academic potential and the right attitude. And we find that works for a really, really good equation once we just add the structure of our programs to that equation. So tutorials, mock interviews, intensive courses.
Fantastic. And one of the things that I think, sort of on that point of taking a breath, sort of not having to reply immediately, one of the things that you notice when you watch other people do mock interviews is actually, okay, it doesn't look weird that they're taking a bit of time to respond. It actually looks like that person is sort of considering their answer and they're about to come up with something pretty good. And so it's quite insightful to actually see it happen as sort of an observer rather than seeing it sort of first person. But yeah, no, definitely those courses are really important. And yeah, so can you sort of tell everyone about the cooling off period as well, please?
Absolutely. So if you were to join us now, you would have something called the cooling off period, and that would be a 5-day window. It's essentially to make sure that you are happy with the program that we are delivering to you, that you're happy with us, and that we are in turn happy with you, your level of engagement, the fact that you are showing up to the tutorials and the mock interviews, that, as Will said, you actually want this process, not superficially, but you actually are engaging with it and you're active in making it happen. So that's really, really important. If, for instance, you were joining us and it was going to be over a longer time period, because we have programs that cover everything from the personal statement to the admissions test and the interviews, it would mean that you'd be probably entry 2023. And if that was the case, your cooling off period would be 2 weeks. So a longer window to kind of make sure that everything is in place as it ought to be. Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense, yeah. And you know, we have got quite a few students who are sort of now starting to think about that application process for 2023.
Yeah.
And definitely what I've noticed in sort of my time working in university applications is giving yourself that extra time does make a big difference. You know, things always take longer than you think they will. You know, there's advice for everyone. Things always take longer than you think they will. And actually, for those who are starting now, I think it's really good for them to start gearing up, start thinking about things over the Christmas holidays, and start setting themselves up for not only, you know, a very good year at school, but also a very good year of making sure these applications go right. And, you know, for those of you in the 2022 cohort, obviously it's a matter of what have you got to do now? It's interviews. That is what you're focusing on. Absolutely. So, yeah, I mean, you know, as Simone said, if students, if the program isn't working for students, we don't want people stuck in something which isn't working for them. We also don't want people stuck in something that they don't want to do. You know, we take the application process very seriously. And sometimes we will have students who sort of enroll with us, but then see how serious we are about it. And they think, actually, I don't know if I'm as enthused about being a medic as you guys want me to be. You know, we're very keen to help our students become what they want to be. So we do have students who say, actually, you know, I've given it a go, but I don't think I'm quite ready for this. And that's fine. But hopefully either way, regardless of whether or not you end up, you know, a student ends up being in a full program, they sort of work with us for a little bit, or they even just have a consultation with us, it's always really helpful if we get a bit of feedback. You know, I'm sure you've got lots of other stuff on your plate right now, but you know, we always do value reviews. So if you do get some time, that's great. And again, that could be if this is the only interaction you've ever had with UniAdmissions, or if you're someone who's, you know, spent a lot of time with us. Regardless of your engagement with us, it's always helpful to see how other people think we're doing. And again, regardless of if it's, you know, if it was a good engagement or not, it might be that you've had a terrible time listening to us today, but we need to know that, because then we can, you know, I don't know, get rid of me or change things up a little bit. It's always really important to get feedback. And when you're doing, you know, as of everything, when you're doing your prep, you want to make sure that when you're doing a mock interview, you're told by someone else how well that went. It's very difficult to know how well something that you're doing is going. I know I've come out of interviews having no idea whether it was good or not. And I've also come out of interviews having a really clear idea if it was good or not, and then being completely wrong. So it's important to have someone else to really give you that perspective. Before we wrap up, just wanted to talk about the podcast. So, you know, obviously in each of these open days, we try and talk about something relevant to universities, to applications, because ultimately we're just trying to get information out there. But Rohan and I do, when we can find time, make podcast episodes. So please do check that out. We, broadly speaking, talk about, sort of alternate between talking about universities and applications and just talking about other things that we're interested in. And we make the episodes very sort of irregularly, but we are trying to do a bit better of doing it every week. We'll see how we manage. But yeah, look, we're gonna move into the Q&A. What you see in front of you is basically an animation showing you how, if you want to, you can arrange a consultation with, you know, Simone or one of the team. Ultimately, you know, it's very helpful for us if you can, you know, if you do want to speak with us, to sort of schedule it in. As I'm sure you can imagine, things are pretty busy these days. But yeah, so if you do want to get in touch with us, please do follow these steps and we will speak with you, you know, talk about your application, give you advice, all those good things. While that's running, let's see what you guys. Let's start off with a very simple one. Will we have access to the recording afterwards, please? We get this every week. Yes, I think Simone, is it they sort of in a day or two, something along those lines?
Yes, exactly. So they will be sent to you automatically. So you'll have access to those.
Okay, okay, fantastic. So that was an easy one to dive into. Anonymous attendee, he always has lots of questions, has asked, hello, this year and probably last year, opportunities for work experience have been much more limited due to COVID restrictions, right? Will interviews adapt to this new reality? So my understanding is that yes, they won't sort of be punitive if you haven't been able to get those kind of work experience, because they know, as you said, that it's been tricky. But of course, you know, hopefully you have still engaged with things. You know, that a lot of our students will have been volunteering at the local vaccination centre. You know, even in times of adversity, they're sort of throwing themselves out there and still trying to find, you know, might not have been what they were wanting, might not have been the 2 weeks on the ward that they were hoping for, but it's still something, and you know, it kind of shows a bit of that determination and commitment. I don't, you know, Simone, what do you think about this?
Yeah, I think you know, it shows that tenacity if you're able to secure something, even if it is, you know, very, very local. I think even if you weren't able to do that and you were able to put something in online in place, equally, it's a really good start, and it shows that you've got that willing to do it. You know, obviously, what they're not looking to see is that you've done nothing, and you know that you don't really have the impetus to put those things in place, because they're really, really important.
Yeah, yeah. I think whatever you have done with your time, they will value it. Even if that just means you've been reading loads, you know, that's still an indication to them that you're engaging with medicine, you know, in general. Praveen has asked, is role play compulsory in all MMI interviews? I talk about role plays a lot, but it's not necessarily compulsory. Every medical school does things slightly differently, and quite often you will get some more information about the stations before your interview. So they might give you a bit of information in terms of what to expect specifically from them. It's not compulsory, but it is used quite a lot because, you know, it's a good way to measure those things that they want to measure. You know, that sort of empathy, the way that you can handle people, those kind of things, and you know how serious you can be in situations where you need to be serious. So I would be surprised, Praveen, if you don't have role plays. Remember, hopefully you've got 4 interviews, right? If across 4 interviews, I'd be very surprised if you didn't have any role plays, but you might be able to get away without it. Who knows? You'll have to let us know. Okie dokie. For Oxbridge, do they add up all your... Sorry about that. Just slapped my laptop for some reason. So for Oxbridge, do they add up all your scores, GCSEs, personal statement, BMAT, interview, etc., so that if you don't do too well in interview, you could still get an offer? Or is it that if you mess up your interview, you won't get an offer, regardless how strong the rest of your application is? That's a long one. But it's a really important question, right? You know, how do they evaluate you once they've gathered all this information about you? Ultimately, yes, a very strong rest of the application could make up for a bit of a weaker interview, okay? But of course, it depends how much you mess up your interview and, you know, what the competition is like. You know, if you've got a flawless BMAT, flawless personal statement, flawless GCSEs, everything else is flawless, but the interview was sort of middling, then you still got a pretty good chance of getting an offer, unless everyone else who's applied had flawless everything as well. The tricky thing is, often with places like Oxbridge, most people will have pretty flawless stuff so far. So you know, you do want to make sure that the interview is a good representation of what you can do, but it won't be the only thing that they're looking at. It's not a matter of, okay, you've got this far, we forget about everything else, now it's just the interview, okay? And again, you know, some people will be surprised because they'll think, actually, the interview didn't go as well as I thought it could, but I still got an offer, and that'll be because it was combined with a strong application otherwise. Simone, someone has asked, does a low BMAT score take away all chances of getting an interview offer? Can you help them out with that?
Yeah, similarly to what you were just saying, I think it's important to remember that everything is in context. So the reason why they have different components of the application cycle is because they're trying to get a sense of who you are as a person and as an academic. So the whole point is that they've got all of this information that indicates to them something about you. So I would say, no, it doesn't mean that you're not going to get an interview. It really does depend on the strength of the other components, the personal statement, all of your academics over the last 4 years, your interviews. So it's just worth being mindful of that. Is it important? Absolutely, yes, it is. It's there for a reason. But could many things kind of contribute to how that goes on the day? Yes. And they might even be aware of those things, like, for instance, this cycle with the technical issues and everything. So it's not cut and dry. And, the application cycle is designed that way for that reason. So don't be disheartened. At this stage, I always say to students and to parents, you've done the BMAT, you've done as much as you can with reference to the BMAT. Now what you should be doing is focusing on your interview preparations in earnest. We're always positive, we're always thinking ahead to the next thing. And that's the best, most effective way you can be using your time in this season. Does that make sense? That's what I would say. And your
absolutely.
interviews are like the last thing, the last way you can influence this outcome. They're really important because of actually where they're positioned. So just make them count.
Yeah, definitely. After that, you can relax for a couple of months until you have to do your A-levels. It's constant assessments from here on out, guys. You signed up for it. This is the life you've picked. But yeah, no, Simone's absolutely right. These are sort of pretty critical things. It is very easy, Simone was talking about, not getting caught up about the BMAT, just sort of plowing onwards and doing the best what you can. That even applies to each interview, right? You could go to, let's say you have an interview at Manchester and it could not go well, right? That's a possibility. Very easy to get caught up in that. But actually, you just got to think, look, I did my best. It's behind me. I know what needs to be improved and I'm going to work on that. And I'm going to make sure that the next 3 go really well. That's the most positive way to do all those kind of things. What kind of questions are asked at data analysis stations? So the example I always give is sort of to calculate someone's BMI, or to and I give that because it's the example that my girlfriend, who's a 5th-year medical student, gives me. So ultimately, yeah, the example she gives is that you could be asked to calculate someone's BMI, and then in a follow-up station, you could be asked to explain why BMI is used and what it's helpful for, and sort of what it can tell you and what's the point of it, basically. So those are the kind of things that she's had in her experience of doing MMIs. And so, broadly speaking, it's going to be something along those lines. You could be given data, so you could be given graphs and asked, to interpret it, things like that. And again, there will be examples of this available. And like I say, it might that your medical school sort of does give you a bit of a heads up in terms of the exact stations to expect. Anonymous attendee has an interview this Friday. Well done, fantastic. That's really good to hear. It is also mock week at my school. How should I split my time? I don't want to fall behind on A-levels as well. So that's fair enough. It's a bit specific. So normally we try not to go too specific to try and make it as general and helpful for everyone. But I appreciate this is Friday. One thing I could say is do feel free to book a consultation with us if you want to talk about it in more detail. But I would just speak with the school and explain the situation, and either ask to sort of postpone mock week or potentially to the new year after Christmas. Hopefully they should be understanding, right? This is really important for you, and they should take that on board. In terms of splitting your time, that would require a longer conversation, I'm afraid. But yeah, have a chat with school. That's the first thing. Just be really open with them and see how helpful they can be, would be my advice. Will the recording be available afterwards? Absolutely. It will get emailed to you. Whoever, whatever email you registered for this on, it should get sent through. Hamza has asked, how would you suggest we set up MMI and what practice between friends or others? Good question. So the short answer is to say, actually, I like to think we do a pretty good job of setting up very realistic and helpful MMIs. So if that is something you're trying to do, you can always have a chat with us. Do get in touch. If you're just doing it with friends, then what you can do is, so you can Google sort of past MMI questions. Make sure that the website you get it from is sort of reliable. You can also buy, get interview books. So we make a book that you can get off of Amazon, which has lots and lots of sort of previous MMI questions. And ultimately, what I would do is, get yourself in a room, get your friend or your friends to sort of set up a few different chairs. And I quite like the sort of, oh wait, hold on, you're doing it all virtually these days anyway. Well, it doesn't matter. Sit down in front of a computer. I would actually practice your MMIs virtually. You can practice them in person, but even if it's with your mum, get her to use, go next door and use a computer so that you have that experience of doing it through a screen. Because of course, whenever you're practicing something, you want to practice for it in a similar way to the real thing. So no, it is, they're all doing it virtually this year, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So forget what I said about chairs. That's old news. Get yourself in front of a laptop. And yeah, either go online or buy a book or have a chat with us, and you'll be able to set up hopefully a pretty lifelike MMI. Haley asks, or Hardy perhaps, sorry if I've mispronounced it, if I stutter during an interview, could I be marked down? Simone, what do you think about that?
I don't think so, because I think, if it's something that you're not able to control, you shouldn't be marked down for that. So it's a tense situation, you are likely to be nervous, and as a result that might happen, but I'm sure that they will take all of those factors into consideration. I don't see why they would be marked down for that. Will, do you agree?
Yeah. There's no way that would have any negative effect on on the way that they evaluate you. If it's I know a few different people with stutters, and it varies a lot from person to person in terms of how difficult they find it. If you know that you have a problem with stuttering, then you'll know how it works, and you'll know sort of what can trigger it more. One of my friends, it was always triggered by a particular teacher because he was very nervous around that teacher. So you will have a sense of how to potentially moderate it a little bit, but if it comes up, really don't worry about it. They will be very understanding. Remember who's interviewing you, right? These are people who are going to be pretty empathetic and understanding. They care more about sort of the substance of what you're saying. Yes, obviously, I said earlier, one of the things they're looking for is clearness of communication. Stammering, stuttering, that's not going to be a problem, really. You'll still be able to sort of explain yourself eloquently, regardless. Anonymous attendee has asked, if you were asked a difficult question, what can be the thinking process? I'm not entirely sure what you mean. Potentially, could you rephrase that and send it again? I don't know how I would answer that. Simone, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think maybe a little bit more clarity would be good. Just
ask it again, rephrase it, and we'll do what we can. Do universities consider your whole application before getting an interview, or is it solely on the BMAT and then the application, predicted grades plus 0? Okay, it depends on the university. People often get annoyed with me because I always say it depends, but it does. that's how they like to do it. So for example, somewhere like Liverpool, Liverpool says that they won't look at your personal statements, that they will not look at it when they're selecting you for interview. Okay. So Liverpool won't consider your whole application. They'll just look at your grades and test. Whereas other universities look at different things. So Cardiff doesn't really look at the UCAT. Plymouth doesn't really. Nottingham, I think, doesn't really. Whereas there will be others that don't really look at grades that much. So there's there's a different calculation, there's a different algorithm that they use at each medical school. I would spend a bit of time researching so you have a sense. Ideally, obviously the timing isn't great, but ideally for those of you applying for 2023, this is the kind of thing you want to think about before you make your application, because then you can think, okay, actually, X university, let's say, Dundee, they only look at this and this, and those are the things which I'm weakest on, whereas Edinburgh looks at that and that, and those are things I'm strongest on. So I'll apply to Edinburgh rather than Dundee because I'm more likely to get an interview, those kind of things. At this stage, obviously, you can't really change the medical schools you've picked, but if you do a bit of looking into sort of how they weight their application, you'll then have a stronger sense of, okay, who am I actually going to get an interview offer from? Hopefully that's helpful. Anonymous attendee has asked, should we take a portfolio with our work experience certificates, or is this not necessary? Do you mean like if you mean like sort of a bundle of paper sort of detailing everything, I would, if that makes you feel comfortable when you're doing your interview and just to sort of have it there, then fine, but I wouldn't say it's necessary. Simone, do you know if students do this?
Yeah, I mean, maybe for a sense of assurance for them personally, but I don't think that it's necessary to do.
Yeah. Okay. Is it a problem if you're below 18 when the first year starts? It depends where you apply. So again, have a bit of a look into it or book a consultation, but some unis do care and some unis don't. So make sure you're applying to the ones that don't care. You don't want to be sort of missing options just because of you've picked ones that would have never considered you anyway. So what kind of stations do they ask at calculation stations? Is this different from the data analysis? It's a bit different. It's more just a matter of one is a bit more mathematical and one is a bit more interpretation. Data analysis is sort of, this is the data. What does that mean? What does this tell us? What can we, what can you say to, what should you say to this patient looking at this data? Whereas the calculation station is, this is the equation for, I'll use BMI again. This is the equation to work out BMI. This is the sort of core information, work it out for us. So they are slightly different. Okay. How do you get the balance between being empathetic and professional, right, during MMI? Can you be marked down for being over emotional? Simone, thoughts?
I would say a good rule of thumb would be to put yourself in the position of the patient. So I guess you have to strike that balance between the information that you're trying to communicate being really important. So you have to be clear and you have to be sometimes firm and you have to be all of those things, but also to bear in mind that the nature of the information that you're giving might have an emotional impact on the patient, and just to be aware of that. So to treat that with a level of sensitivity. So yes, I think a difficult balance to strike, but I think if you've essentially got the mustard, you'll work out that balance. Would you add anything, Will?
I think, yeah, just practicing it as well. If you're doing it for your first time on the interview, it will be tricky because you won't have experienced it before. But if you've given it a go a few times, and again, you can ask the person that you're doing that interview with, how did that come across?
Yeah.
You should be able to get a sense of how to judge it really. I think on we've got a couple sort of mock interview videos on YouTube. I don't know if they're if they do cover sort of empathetic role play kind of scenario, but it might be worth checking those out and sort of seeing what those look like, because that might help. We've had two people at the same time pretty much ask, if you get a really difficult question and you just don't know what the answer is, what do you do in that situation? So there's a couple of things I wanted to say about this. very rarely are they going to ask you questions which are pure like, do they just asking for a fact? You know, they're not going to say, you know, welcome to this interview. What was the date that DNA was discovered? Very rarely is it those kind of questions that they're actually interested in. Usually it's more problem solving. So it's a bit more sort of logical reasoning, and yeah, you know, problem solving. So you don't necessarily need to know too much information in advance, but you need to be able to apply yourself to these questions. Now, if they ask you a question which really sort of you're stuck on, the first thing to do is to clarify things. Okay, so you are absolutely allowed to say, you know, I'm not quite sure what you mean by this. Could you explain that a bit further? Or, you know, just to get a bit more understanding of what they're asking for. So you can absolutely clarify the question. The second thing is it's fine to say, you know, actually, you know, I'm not too familiar with this area of research. And it's fine to sort of not guess, but to sort of make educated assumptions and form educated ideas. You know, particularly in the sort of Oxford Cambridge interviews, you know, when I had my interview, it wasn't a matter of what's the answer to this question, here's the answer. What's the answer to this question, here's the answer. What's the answer to this question, here's the answer. It's much more of a conversation. And it's much more of a bit of a discussion and a bit of a debate, really. And, you know, sort of building and building on the same question through a conversation. So initially, you might be starting off making a few educated stabs in the dark, but they might help, you know, but that might be what they're interested in. You know, that if I give this person a small amount of information, what kind of conclusions do they come to? Okay, that's quite interesting. I'm going to now lay on a bit more information. Does that mean that this person will then sort of discount that conclusion, or will they double down on it? So, for example, I studied experimental psychology at Oxford, and I used to help with running interviews, and we'd sometimes have schools come in and we'd sort of run mock interviews for them. And one of the questions was about this is testing my memory, is about a twin study in Welsh people. And for some reason, no, well, that was another one. But this is a better example, sorry. It was a study into children, and it was finding that younger siblings were outperforming sort of matched samples of only children. Okay, and ultimately the question was why? What could be the answer? And so actually there's a few different reasons why you could come up with. You could come up with a few different reasons. You know, potentially the younger siblings. Oh, wait, no, was it older siblings? It doesn't really matter exactly what it was, but the point is there are a few different conclusions you could come to. And then the idea is that the interviewer would then say, they then ran another study and found this. And that would disconfirm some of those conclusions. So that would rule some of those out. And they want to say, okay, with this new information, can you adapt to that? Or do you not realize what this means? So whilst you might not know, I've spent a long time answering this question, hopefully it's helpful. Whilst you might not know immediately what the answer is, that is fine. What you want to do is give the best response you can with the information that you have, and don't be afraid to ask for clarification if you need it. Okay. Let's have a lookie. Someone has asked, how did you get your hair so cool? I anticipate this is someone playing some kind of prank. So whoever you are, I don't appreciate it. If you do find my hair very cool, or Simone's hair very cool, then thank you very much. We spend much time on our hair, and I'm glad to see it paying off. Would they ask you? I've not had that before.
That's funny.
Would they ask you to define the pillars of ethics and what they mean, or are they looking more for how you would apply it to the medical scenario? They could do both. They could do both. So they could ask you sort of what you understand of the pillars of ethics, and then they could say, what is the relevance of that to X scenario? So you could absolutely get both. Okay. how would you advise preparing for problems in the NHS questions? Okay, so this is a popular one. This comes up a lot. So my personal approach would be to firstly sort of pay attention, or to have been paying attention to problems in the NHS for the last few months. You know, one thing that I do is, and one thing that I sometimes advise students to do is to download the BBC News app on their phone, because invariably every week there will be a few different articles about something happening in the NHS. So one easy way to prepare is just to sort of engage yourself with what's going on in current affairs with the NHS. The second one is obviously to get someone else to then start posing some of those questions to you. You know, you could set them up and you could say, you know, Mum, can you ask me about sort of the issue with hospital bed numbers currently in a particular area of the UK? And then you know you can practice sort of your how you respond to those different things. But yeah, keeping up to date is what I found to be the best things. Simone, any other advice that you have?
Yeah, I think just, having your ear to the ground, having those conversations with, fellow budding medics, even family members, just engaging with life around you. And I think that will keep you up to date as well.
Yeah, there's all the sort of issues in the NHS is a hot topic, right? Our students in our sort of longer term programs, they go to sort of medical discussion groups each week. And I think they've done 4 or 5 on sort of various problems in the NHS. Talking about shortages, talking about staffing, talking about retention, all those kind of things is something which is on people's minds a lot because it's a big problem. So yeah, like Simone says, keeping your ear to the ground, keeping up to date is, a good idea. Raki has asked, in your mock interview, do you do it to the university you have the interview for, or just a generic style interview? Okay, so I think what you mean is sort of the students that we take on and arrange mock interviews for, can it be university specific? Yes, it can be university specific. Normally students and tutors will work together to make sure that, there's the set of mock interviews, and normally they'll have a few are as good a representation of what it's going to be like on the real thing. And, it might be that actually you find MMIs pretty easy, but your panel interviews you find a lot harder. So then you can want to skew your practice towards the thing that you're finding most difficult. And of course, that's, very different from person to person. But yeah, no, definitely we can and we do just make it as specific as we can. Someone has asked if you could talk about Matt Hancock for the NHS question. If you're very keen to, yeah, absolutely. It's the sort of the political side of things is a big side of things, and the management side of things as well. There's always going to be, whilst medicine is developing, constantly, there's also the way that we handle medicine and healthcare as a country. And of course, the person at the top has a big sway in that. And it could be that that's something, but again, you want to make sure that you're not ramming in a topic that shouldn't really be there based on the question. You want to make sure that if you are using Matt Hancock for, presumably an example of how to run the NHS fantastically, you'd want to make sure that that's the question that you're being asked, and you're not answering something that you're not being asked. An anonymous attendee has asked, how do you stand out on the why medicine question? So that's a good question. I personally, my approach to this is to not worry too much about standing out and worry about being genuine, because people sort of, they kind of feel like they need the sort of classic X Factor sob story in order to stand out. But, what they're looking for is, why is this person here? And why are they going to stay here? Because if you want to be a doctor for money, if you want it because you get very rich, potentially, depends what speciality you go into. Ultimately, that's, you can get money in other ways. And so that's not really a motivating factor that's necessarily going to keep you in the medical field. If you want to be a doctor, because ultimately you want to, on a daily basis, help people, that's a pretty strong motivator. They're going to be keen to see that. You don't have to have, at the age of 3, have, seen a dramatic scene in a hospital, and from that point on, you knew medicine was for you. For some people, that is genuinely what has happened. But if that isn't what's happened for you, you don't need a big story like that. You just need genuine motivation and interest. And again, they've done many interviews. They will be able to tell who is genuinely interested and who is not, and who's potentially doing it because they've been told to do it rather than because they actually want to do it. That's a problem. Medical degrees have I would say a relatively high dropout in first year, and that's because even though they go through this process, there are still people who get through, but then actually it's not right for them. So they are, obviously the medical professors don't want that, but they are going to be keen to try and take on people who genuinely are keen on it. Simone, anything to add?
Yeah, no, I think that's about the size of it, isn't it? You want to be authentic at the end of the day. The likelihood of them working out whether your answer is convoluted or just untrue is high. It's risky. There's no point in doing that. Just, speak from your heart, explain to them why you are there. And I think that will come through.
Yeah. So someone has asked, can you criticize the NHS during an interview? Not the doctors or nurses, but the management. Simone, thoughts?
If that's your genuine feeling, absolutely you can give your opinion. Not to just desecrate the situation, but more to just shine a light and to let them know that you're aware of that situation and that maybe there could be a fix. I think, it would be a valid point to make.
Yeah, I think, and this is more broadly for sort of interviews in general. If you've got an opinion which is sort of based on reading and sort of studies that you've looked at, then absolutely that is an opinion you can voice. If you're kind of indoctrinated into a line of thinking which is completely baseless and has no sort of fact base behind it, that's not what they're looking for. I anticipate, in an Oxford sort of panel interview where you do have more time, most of these professors would probably be very happy to have a debate with you about whether or not the NHS is run well or not, and most of them will be able to make arguments for both sides. Part of the whole being an academic, being at university, is the fact that you can argue and you can make arguments for sides that, even if you don't agree with them, because you can see and you can rationalize and you can evaluate. And of course, at the end of it, you weigh up the evidence on one side and against the evidence on the other side, and then you make an opinion. But that doesn't mean that you just disregard any evidence on the other side. You are allowed to evaluate it without that then sort of jeopardizing your belief systems. Okay, so you absolutely do criticize it, but make sure that you're making a valid criticism. Don't just sort of start shouting about how terrible it is. And again, so what you'll often get, I'm thinking about PPE, but you'll often get candidates for PPE who have very strongly entrenched opinions one way or the other about politics and running a country, and that's fine, but they want someone who has opinions based on information and information that's been well evaluated. They don't want people who are sort of dogmatically in one camp and won't even listen to anyone from the other. In the interview, Risha has asked, in the interview or MMI answers, is it better to include examples of experience with the answer? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, you can back it up with something you've read, something you've done, something you've seen. That's completely fine. Don't feel like you have to cite, every few sentences. But absolutely, if there's something which comes to mind and you think, actually, I was reading something the other day, or I was actually involved in a hospital where there was this problem, you can talk about that, absolutely. Is it appropriate to use terms like well, etc., in the beginning of the answer to buy some microseconds to think? So you can, but you can also just say nothing. Or you can sort of take a drink. Ultimately, you know, people do use filler words. People can be very worried about filler words, but actually filler words are a really interesting part of language. There's a good example. But you can, but don't feel like you have to say something if, you know, and you're not allowed to just say nothing for a little bit and to think. You're absolutely allowed to sort of pause and think. And that is definitely something worth practicing, because it's difficult to do. It's really difficult to do. But actually you will come off as more intelligent, because it gives across the sense to the other person that you are evaluating and considering and thinking, rather than just blurting out the first thing that comes into your mind. Whether or not, once you have had that pause, what you say is any good is sort of another thing, but it gives that feeling. And then we've got a question: are there many candidates who were offered last year waiting to get in this year, and will this decrease the number of places available? So I guess this is sort of people who applied for deferred entry. And I think I remember last year, people were actually being offered money to defer. I think it's somewhere like maybe Nottingham was giving students sort of a few £1,000s to defer their entry. So there has been, and this is something which certain people are worried about. There's this issue of, you know, additional people deferring, but, you know, also applications overall are just up. It is competitive this year. It's always been competitive, but it's more competitive this year. And I anticipate, actually, guys, medicine is going to carry on becoming more competitive. I don't see it going any other way. Ultimately, what you need to do is just make sure, right? You know, there's 10 places, 100 people vying for them. I need to be at least the 10th best. And that actually doesn't matter if there's 100 people vying for them or 1,000 people vying for them. So long as you're the 10th best, you will get a place. It's obviously very easy for me to say, just don't worry about it. It's a lot harder to actually not worry about it. But ultimately, focus on you, focus on what you're doing, and focus on being the best candidate you can be. That is, at the end of the day, all you can do. And if you do it, and if you work hard at it, and you put in the effort, you probably manage it. So yeah, that would be my advice. Simone, I'm sure you've had lots of conversations with people worried about it being sort of overflowing with candidates this year, right?
Yeah, and people just trying to work out the best way to differentiate themselves. And again, as you've said, it's that focus, making sure that your attention is on you, obviously in context to everybody else and what's happening, but that's essentially what you can control. You can't control the other bits. You can control what you can control, which, you know, is your application, your level of effort in, you know, whether it's your A levels or the application process. Making sure that you've got that laser focus is really important.
Yeah, we try. It always feels, I can, whenever I'm speaking with people, I can hear on the phone them sort of thinking, well, that's very easy for you to say, but ultimately it is just, we're quite practical here, and it is the best way to approach it. I've just seen there are some questions in the chat, so I'm going to have a look if those are different questions quickly. A couple of things about recordings, we've done that. What advice would you give for role plays, ways to stay calm, and are there certain keywords they are looking for? So obviously, I mean, I can understand that the role plays are a bit of a cause for concern for you guys. In terms of staying calm, I've said this a lot of times, but practice, you know, the more practice and the more natural it feels, the easier it will be. You know, it's much easier to go into an interview and be thinking, I've done this before, than thinking, oh, what am I doing here? So if it's something that you've done 100 times, then it's something that you'll be able to do. In terms of staying calm and sort of not getting nervous in an interview, this again is something which is very, very, it's a very individual thing, right? How do you manage on the spot stress? And that, there are coaches out there who sort of give guidance and things like that. The way that I do it is ultimately, if I'm going into an exam or going into an interview, then I don't necessarily actively say this to myself, but I know that I've done everything I can at this point. And there's nothing that I can do now to make a difference. All I can do is, I've set myself up, I've revised whatever I've been revising, I've practiced whatever I've been practicing. I'm in the situation where I'm in the best sort of version of myself to be able to do well in this assessment. And worrying about it does nothing to help. Now, if it's a week before the exam, worrying about it will mean that I'm more likely to revise. So that's great. I'll worry about it. That'll, incite me to revise more. So that's great. That's helpful. It's sort of that nervous energy is beneficial. But at the point where there's nothing, it can't help anymore. I find it, it's okay for me to be able to sort of let go of it a little bit. Still get nervous, absolutely, but ultimately you just do your best. And so yeah, again, me effectively saying don't worry about it, which is just sort of, I guess, what I do, but it's obviously harder to do that and just to not worry about it. I understand that. A couple of these are repeated questions, so we won't go through them again. Yeah, okay, I think that those we're all caught up with. Two more questions, and then it looks like we've come to the end. If you do have any last minute questions, please do enter them in. Otherwise, I think we'll sort of wrap things up in the next few minutes. Does applying twice to the same university affect your chances of getting in? I'm presuming you mean 1 year after the other, rather than using up 2 UCAS choices for the same university, which I don't think you can do anyway. It depends. So reapplicants is a whole nother, that's a whole nother open day. And we do open days on reapplications. We'll probably do them near the start of next year, where there will be, some people who aren't getting interviews, or interviews aren't going well and they're not getting offers, and they need to think about that. Broadly speaking, reapplying is fine. From the data that we've gathered from Oxford and Cambridge, actually reapplicants seem to do a bit better than first-time applicants. Now, there are reasons for that. There are sort of sampling issues with that, which again, we talk about in the other open day. But there's no reason why you couldn't get in if you reapply. So some people are so against reapplying. Some schools say there's no point. You won't get in. It's not really the case. What you do need to do is make sure that when you do reapply, you are a stronger candidate than you were before. Because if you're exactly the same caliber of candidate as you were the year before, they're probably going to say, well, it's actually more competitive now, so why would we take you on? What you need to do is look at, okay, so last year, this year, my UCAT wasn't what it should have been. So next year, you've got to make sure that that's fantastic. Or my interview wasn't as good as it should have been. So next year, you've got to, it's usually very easy. We do very well with our reapplicants, actually, because it's easy to pick out what went wrong first time around and focus on that and really work on that and make sure that it's not a problem next time around. And then a final question, do you think emailing the people who interviewed you is a good idea to say thank you? I don't think it's going to make a difference in terms of whether or not you get accepted, but it is a nice, polite thing to do. So it depends why you're doing it. If you're doing it because you think it will give you an advantage, I really wouldn't rely on that. I would focus a lot more of your energy on being a good interview candidate. But actually, if it's just something that you want to do, then it's fine. It's not going to cause any problems. So it's not a bad idea. But of course, if you want to spend your time doing that, then go ahead. Simone, I imagine you sort of feel the same way?
Yeah, exactly. I don't think it's going to sway a different outcome. But it is, a pleasant thing to do, definitely, especially if you're feeling compelled to do it.
Yeah, and you might have, at my interviews, I actually had a fantastic time. you know, it was a really good experience. It was so, you know, I got there. So back then we went to, you know, the college, and we stayed overnight because those things were allowed. And I got there and I thought, actually, if this is as far as I go, I'm happy, because this is, you know, this is pretty amazing to be speaking with these kind of people. So you might actually have a really good experience, and you might sort of, it might be a nice way to wrap that all up. But yeah. Okay, looks like we've got to the end of our questions. I'm more than happy to accept a last one or two if there's any burning questions that you have. But if you know, have questions later on today or next week, do give us a call, or, you know, book an appointment, and we'll be able to go into things in a bit more detail. There are a couple questions which I didn't dive into too much, and definitely that's something that you could spend time speaking with a consultant about. Some of you have interviews already. Fantastic, well done, best of luck for them. I can't remember your name, but for the person who was struggling with sort of the mock exams at school, I hope you're able to sort of fit it all in. For those of you who haven't been invited to interviews yet, don't panic. I know it can be stressful when you see other people being invited to interviews. It doesn't mean anything. So the time that you get invited doesn't really mean anything. Okay. So if you're invited to interview 3 weeks after your friend, that does not mean that they are sort of doing better than you. So try not to read into it too much. Be patient, prepare, get ready, so that when you do get asked to interview, you're ready to go, and it's not a, oh my God, now I have to actually be good at interviews. Okay. But yeah, thank you all for coming. It's always nice to talk to you guys about stuff, and thank you for all your questions. We had some really interesting ones. Thank you very much, Simone, for joining me. It's been lovely to see you as well. Have a great weekend, everyone. And yeah, that's it from us. Take care. Bye-bye.
See you.
I actually have to end the meeting now. Terrible. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.